Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When television, radio, traditional newspapers, political blogs, and even private citizens spread lies, they can be sued and held liable for damages or FCC fines. But pursuant to 230, you all can't be sued. You have immunity. But it ain't 1996 anymore, is it? Meanwhile, lies are spreading like wildfire through platforms. Americans are getting hurt or killed, and the reason is your algorithms. I want you to all know I was held captive in the gallery during the Capitol insurrection. I was surrounded by domestic terrorists that killed the Capitol police officer, ransacked the Capitol, and almost disrupted a presidential election. And many of these domestic terrorists plotted on your platforms. I think we all understand by now this violence is real. And so this is why we're here today in the Committee of Jurisdiction with power to protect our fellow Americans. Mr. Zuckerberg had mentioned effective moderation systems. So now we know you have systems that can prevent many of these harms. Thank you for your statement supporting accountability today, and even for championing support accountability in ads. So the question is, what specific changes to Section 230 do you support to ensure more accountability? Mr. Zuckerberg just mentioned categories of content that are clearly illegal, US privacy standards, and data portability as three standards we should be looking at. Mr. Pichai, should we be creating these standards and then holding platforms accountable if they violate them under 230?
Congressman, first of all, there are many ways, there are many laws today which do hold us liable. FTC has oversight. We have consent decree with the FCC, COPPA, HIPAA, etc. And for example, areas where there are privacy laws, and we have called for federal privacy legislation. But in Europe, with GDPR, in California, we have privacy state legislation. We are both accountable as well as we are subject to private plaintiff action against these statutes.
So, Mr. Pichai, you agree with these categories that were just outlined by Mr. Zuckerberg, is that correct?
I definitely think what Mark is talking about along the lines of transparency and accountability are good proposals to think through. There are various legislative proposals along those.
Mr. Dorsey, do you think we should be establishing categories of content that are clearly illegal, US privacy standards and data portability, as well as penalties for violation of those standards?
I believe as we look upon 230 and evolutions of it, building upon it, I think we need more transparency around content moderation practices, not just the policies. I think we need more robust appeals processes. And I think the real issue is algorithms and giving people more choice around algorithms, more transparency around algorithms. So if there's any one I would pick, it would be that one. It's a tough one, but it's the most impactful.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Zuckerberg, political misinformation spread rampantly, unfortunately, in Spanish in Florida's Hispanic community on Facebook in the 2020 presidential election. Even with the political ad ban, how do you think this happened? Mr. Zuckerberg.
Congressman, it's I do still think that there's too much misinformation across all of these media that we've talked about today. How did it happen? I mean, I think we've talked a lot today about algorithms. I actually think a lot of this stuff happens in what we refer to as deterministic products, like messaging, right? Someone sends a text message to someone else. There's no algorithm there determining whether that gets delivered. People can just send that to someone else. A lot of the stuff, I think, unfortunately, was amplified on TV and in traditional news as well. There was certainly some of this content on Facebook, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we're building effective systems that can reduce the spread of that. I think a lot of those systems performed well during this election cycle, but it's an iterative process, and there are always going to be new things that we will need to do to keep up with the different threats that we face.
Mr. Zuckerberg, will you commit to boosting Spanish language moderators and systems on Facebook, especially during election season, to help prevent this from happening again in Spanish language?
Congressman, this is already something that we focus on. We already beefed up and added more capacity to Spanish language fact checking and Spanish language authoritative information resources. that's certainly something that we hope to build on in the future. So the answer to your question is yes.
Gentlemen's time has expired.